the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. The indecision grows. No one seems to be in charge. No one can make a decision as to whether the pro-Palestine march should go ahead in London on Armistice Day. We're going to need to build 8,000 new roads in this country just to cope with net migration levels at the current number. Don't take it from me. Migration Watch will come on and tell us all. And the debanking scandal grows as more and more people start to complain to the authorities. I would like to think I might have had just something to do with that. But before all of those items, let's get the news from Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. In the top story this hour, the Prime Minister has welcomed assurances from the Metropolitan Police that the pro-Palestinian march planned for this weekend during the nation's annual period of remembrance will be routed away from the Cenotaph in London. Rishi Sunak spoke with the Met Police Chief Sir Mark Rowley today amid concerns the march could interfere with remembrance commemorations. In a statement, the Prime Minister described the planned march as disrespectful and offensive in any case. The London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, says the policing of protests shouldn't become political, but the Met insists it is, keeping an eye on this weekend's events. Transport Secretary Mark Harper, though, says Sir Mark Rowley will be held accountable for any trouble.
This is the operational responsibility of the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. The legal powers are his to request that. He has to make a judgment based on all of the factors that he has to take into account. And as the Prime Minister said, it's the Met's responsibility to make sure the march goes off safely, and we'll hold him to account for that.
The Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt has been closed because of security concerns. The Foreign Office says more than 150 British nationals managed to leave Gaza via the crossing last night. And that comes as the Israeli military says Hamas has lost control in northern Gaza as thousands of residents head south. The UN says 15,000 passed through the crossing yesterday. Israel has said today it won't reoccupy the Gaza Strip or control it for an extended period of time, but they will press on with their offensive against Hamas. Here at home, a war memorial in Greater Manchester has been guarded by police today after protesters sprayed Free Palestine graffiti across the base. Greater Manchester Police said the cenotaph in Rochdale was vandalised and poppies were removed yesterday afternoon, and it's currently a crime scene. Both police and Rochdale Council have condemned the vandalism as criminal disrespect, which is totally unacceptable. Now, the government's long-running dispute with rail unions that's led to widespread train strikes over recent months may soon be over. After talks between the Rail Delivery Group and the RMT union, a plan has now been set out in what's been described a mutually agreed way forward. It includes a pay rise backdated to 2022 and job security guarantees. The RMT says it's a welcome development. Members will now vote on whether or not to accept the offer. And lastly, in the United States, Donald Trump's daughter has been testifying in court in New York in a civil fraud trial. Ivanka Trump has told the court she did not recall details of property deals she worked on at her father's company. The lawsuit alleges that Mr. Trump intentionally inflated the value of his property to deceive banks and insurers, thereby gaining better terms on loans. The judge has already ruled that the Trump Organization committed fraud and that this trial is merely to determine penalties. Mr. Trump has denied any wrongdoing, calling the trial a witch hunt. This is GB News across the UK and now across Europe. Welcome to our new viewers and listeners away from the UK who are tuning in for the very first time today. Details on how to stay in touch, of course, at gbnews.com.
Good evening. The indecision is reaching levels that are almost embarrassing. Who's in charge of making a decision as to whether the pro-Palestine march should go ahead through central London this Saturday, Armistice Day, or not? Now, it was interesting that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, summoned Sir Mark Rowley, the boss of the Metropolitan Police, to Downing Street today. He cancelled another engagement to go there. But it seems to be all over the place because, you see, Sir Mark yesterday said it's up to politicians to draw the lines. It's up to politicians to set the rules. But I would argue, Sir Mark, that actually the Public Order Act of 1986 is perfectly clear. If you think there is a serious danger of violence or damage, then you have the power to recommend that the march is banned. And given some of the appalling scenes from the last 3 Saturdays, and what we've seen happen to poppy sellers on Charing Cross Station, and worse still, Waverley Station up in Edinburgh, and now the vandalism, of course, of that cenotaph in Rochdale, I'd have thought the danger was pretty obvious and pretty clear. So they had the meeting in Downing Street, and Rishi Sunak has come out with a sort of pretty weak-kneed statement saying that he thinks that the whole thing is inappropriate and wrong, but it's people's right to march, and that's what we fought for. Well, there is a point, of course, in that. But nobody wants to take responsibility, let alone, of course, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Now, he's put out a statement. He's been ever so quiet for the last week. In the last hour or two, saying, no one disputes that Remembrance events must be protected, but the policing of protests are operational decisions for the Met, not the Home Secretary. Yes, Sadiq Khan, we know that, but who has direct responsibility for the operations of the Metropolitan Police Force? Well, it's you. And you have enormous power. It was Khan, of course, who got rid of Sir Mark Rowley's predecessor. Yes, Cressida Dick got sacked because Mayor Khan didn't want her there anymore. He wants nothing to do with it. The government want nothing to do with them. By the way, if they wanted to, they could ban the march by passing emergency powers. That wouldn't be a problem, but they won't do it. And it seems that the Met are, frankly, I think, increasingly turning a blind eye to some of the awful things that are being said and done on our streets. I suspect in some ways it's probably now too late to ban this march. People will have booked tickets. They're probably going to turn up anyway. So is there a compromise solution? Well, I think there is. You see, the police certainly don't have the power to ban gatherings. So why not allow the pro-Palestine protesters to have their gathering in Hyde Park, to fly their flags in Hyde Park. But if they leave Hyde Park and head towards our national monuments, then arrest every single one of them. That, to me, seems to be, at this late hour, perhaps the only possible compromise. Love to get your thoughts. Farage@gbnews.com. Well, who better to join me to discuss this than Stephen Roberts, former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Stephen, good evening. Thank you for joining us on the programme. I noticed that in 2011, when the English Defence League wanted to have a march through East London, it seemed quite a straightforward move that the march was banned. Why was that one banned, and yet the boss of the Met doesn't think this one should be?
Because in that case, there was credible intelligence that the march would cause disorder, that there were people involved in the march intent on disorder, and that the whole event couldn't be policed safely, therefore it should be banned. On this occasion, the Commissioner has said quite plainly he does not have that intelligence to say that he can't control, that there are people intent on disorder that he will be unable to control. And I'm afraid you're quite wrong, Nigel. The Commissioner is taking responsibility, as is his constitutional job, for policing this event properly. And what we have, in fact, is a completely needless political dispute here. The organisers of the demonstration have worked with the police to make sure that the demonstration takes place at a different time, in a different location, so that the two events will have nothing to do with each other. And that is entirely right and proper. And as the Prime Minister has finally conceded, that's exactly the sort of thing that those people who fought bravely in the Second World War were fighting for the political freedoms to demonstrate peacefully and lawfully.
No, I quite understand that, Stephen, but, you know, when you say to me that the EDL march was banned because there were people there who intelligence said were intent on disorders, exactly what you just said, there are people on the marches for the last 3 Saturdays, and so undoubtedly will be there on this Saturday, calling for jihad, calling for intifada, calling outright, in many cases, celebratory messages, chants from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. And we know that many of the people involved in organising these marches are actually themselves former known associates of Hamas. They've been throwing fireworks around in Trafalgar Square. We know there will be a significant number of people on this march on Saturday who are intent on disorder. Well, surely we have the last 3 weekends to prove that to us.
No, what we don't have, and what the Commissioner has said very clearly that he doesn't have, is intelligence to suggest disorder of a very serious scale. It's not something that's done lightly. I think it's only been done once in the last couple of decades that marches have been banned. And he's confident that with the forces that he's got at his disposal, this can be policed safely and in an orderly way.
Well, it all feels a bit one-sided to me. I mean, Stephen, what about...
point as well, Nigel,
go on, sorry.
That those who would want to cause disorder are very unlikely to be deterred by any sort of ban now. So what would happen would be that the police would be faced with the same event, the same disorder that they would have to deal with irrespective of the ban. The only people the ban would affect are those people who are law-abiding and who want to demonstrate peaceably.
I understand the point that we're coming to a late hour. And as I said, people have booked train tickets or whatever to come and attend this. Coaches, indeed, have been booked, I know, from the north of England. What about my compromise solution? That we allow them to have a gathering in Hyde Park, way away from many veterans' events that will be taking place. There are memorials, divisional memorials, all around central London, as you well know. What about we say you can have a gathering, you can have speakers, whatever you want, in Hyde Park, but you don't leave Hyde Park and march on the streets with your pro-Palestine flags? What about that as a compromise?
Saying that you can't do something means that you have to be in a position to enforce that prohibition. You said earlier on, if they march towards something we don't like, we'll arrest a lot of them. Well, I'm afraid arresting something like, tens of thousands of demonstrators, that's not going to happen. It's simply not possible. You need 4 or 5 officers per individual arrested, and the Met, indeed the police service nationally, would struggle to deal with that. What you would end up with is a riot. And that's, above all, what the service needs to prevent.
OK. Well, as ever, Stephen Roberts, thank you for joining us on the programme. I have to say, folks, it all seems a bit one-sided to me. If you're the EDL, you're the bad guys. If you're pro-Hamas, you are just fine. I'm joined by Stephen Barrett, barrister and writer. Stephen, the Metropolitan Commissioner says it's up to government to lay down the lines and we will then act. But isn't the truth of it, the lines have been laid down in legislation already?
Yes, and I think that the public need to stop listening to what the Metropolitan Commissioner says, because he keeps saying things to them which are not true. Now, that's quite a problem, and I can go through some of the things he said in the last few days. By the way, your point about us running out of time is largely because the Metropolitan Police Commissioner has dragged his feet day after day after day. What we have seen is successive weekly protests in London getting more and more violent. The one last Saturday involved direct assault of people in military uniform. It involved mass assault of members of the public in McDonald's. The idea that the legal test of a risk of serious disorder is not met is just a nonsense. That's why the Met Commissioner had to just, frankly, whether intentionally or purely by accident or because of incompetence, the Metropolitan Commissioner has reached for static protest. You do not get from Hyde Park to Nine Elms by standing still. This is not static protest, Nigel. Also, by the way, static protests, which are actually called assemblies, I don't know why he's using silly words, but there we are. Assemblies can have conditions put on them, and that's what you're doing as a compromise. You're saying, have your assembly. I mean, actually, you could have it in Blackheath or somewhere even further away, where it's a big open space where no damage can be done, and you can keep them in. And you know what you can also do, Nigel? You could time limit them so that before the sun goes down, they're all to disperse. Because we saw last time, quite clearly, the violence kicked off when the sun goes down. And we have reached a point in our society where we have so abandoned common sense that apparently we must sit there, nod our heads and pretend he's intelligent because the Met Commissioner has not got any intelligence that there is a risk of violence, despite 3 weeks of protest in which we've seen escalating violence. We are to ignore our eyes. Freedom is now slavery, and we must do as we're told, Nigel, and just pretend everything will be fine. Well, if this goes ahead, Nigel, this should be on the head of that commissioner.
Well, I think it may well be. Stephen Barrett, very eloquently put. Now, Stephen Barrett absolutely disregarding the words of the Met boss, which is not, of course, a call for all of us to ignore the police. Now, Saturday is Armistice Day. Up until the Second World War, that was the moment that was commemorated around the country. Since the Second World War, it's been the nearest Sunday. But an organisation called the Western Front Association, set up over 40 years ago to honour those that fought in that great conflict of the First World War, they revived the whole thing about 25 years ago. I've been a member of the WFA since 1987. I attended that first laying of a wreath at 11 o'clock on the 11th at the Cenotaph. And I'm very pleased to say that Richard Hughes of the WFA joins me now. Now, Richard, as I say, I've been a long-standing member of the organisation. I've attended more than once your service on the 11th at the Cenotaph. But you feel that the pro-Palestine march should still go ahead?
Well, good evening, Nigel. Thank you very much for inviting me on the programme. This is very difficult, isn't it? You've got some very, very challenging competing priorities here. As you will appreciate, as much as anyone, the Western Front Association supports the people who fought in the Great War to protect the democracy that we enjoy. So instinctively, our sense is that we want people to be able to to demonstrate. And when you talked a few moments ago about a compromise, whether people are moving or whether they're assembling, I mean, our hope is that the very, very important commemorative services that will be going on in London can go on undisturbed. And I think one of the great sadnesses of this week is that the reason why we have these services has been overshadowed by this political debate. And there's no doubt at all the Metropolitan Police are in a very difficult position because they're trying to manage remembrance events. There are big sports events, and there's also a huge demonstration. So they are in a tricky spot. And what seems to be clear is that this complex relationship between Sadiq Khan, the Home Secretary, and the Mayor is very, very unclear to many of us. Who's got power and who's got influence?
Absolutely. I mean, who's in charge of all of this? They're passing the buck. It's the most ridiculous game. But Richard, be honest with me. When the WFA turn up just before 11 o'clock on Saturday at the Cenotaph, they're going to do so this year with some degree of trepidation, aren't they?
Yes. We would like to think that we were turning up at the Cenotaph on Saturday morning, as we've done for the last 40 years. And you can remember when this first started, there'd be a small handful of WFA members hanging on to the Cenotaph, trying not to get knocked over by the buses flying past. It's a very, very sacred and important act of remembrance on behalf of this country. And we would like to go to the Cenotaph thinking only of that and not of the political debate that has been going on this week.
No.
And I'm sad that even if it goes ahead smoothly on Saturday, this week has been tainted because of these discussions which have been going on.
Sadly, Richard Hughes, I have to agree. I hope everything goes well on Saturday. I can't join you this year, but I will in future years, I promise. And thank you for joining us.
You will all be welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In a moment, we get Migration Watch on to tell us we're going to need to build 8,000 new roads. Yes, 8,000 just to cope with net migration into Britain. Why does this never get discussed on any other news channel?
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, I asked you, who is in charge of making this decision, indeed perhaps even the country as a whole? Michael says, well, it's not Rishi, it seems. No, it's not Rishi. He absolutely is passing the buck. Colin says, I thought Khan was in control of London and therefore responsible. Colin, so did I, but he says, not me, Gov. And Matt says, the police have lost control of the streets and they know it. And Anonymous says, no idea who's in charge anymore. The whole country is an utter mess. Now, one of the least discussed subjects in British public life is the impact that the population explosion has had on our quality of life. I'm not for a moment here discussing a failure of multiculturalism, which many will see happen on the streets of London perhaps this Saturday. No, what I'm talking about here are sheer numbers. And one organisation who've done more than anyone to really try and wake people up to this, and they've been going for over 20 years, is Migration Watch. I'm joined by Dr. Mike Jones, their executive director. Now, Mike, the last set of net migration figures into Britain was 606,000. The next set of figures are due out in about 2 weeks' time. We don't yet know what they're going to be, but you've done some work here and projected what this means for the country if we carry on as we are.
We have indeed. Migration Watch has predicted that if net migration figures continue at the current level until 2046, our population will increase from 67 million to 83 million. That's the best case scenario, depending on birth rates and so on.
Yeah.
This is roughly equivalent to 50 new Birminghams. So in this recent paper, we've taken a snapshot of what 50 new Birminghams looks like in terms of infrastructure. So, you know, you're looking at around 8,000 new roads.
8,000 roads. I mean, that's a lot of roads. Yeah.
You know, more than 2,000 busways, you know, more than 2,000 GP surgeries. You know, you're looking at close to sort of 7,000 new schools. You know, 75 new universities, 75 police stations. This is going to impose a huge burden on infrastructure.
Yeah, we're always told, I've been told for decades, especially by the very clever people at the BBC when they've interviewed me and these sorts, I've been told, but Nigel, you know, people coming into the country and working and paying tax are a net benefit to the economy. But none of those calculations cost in what it's going to really cost the state and what it has cost the state already to build new schools, new roads, new hospitals. No one's ever calculated this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of fancy term in economics. They call it negative externalities.
Do they really?
Yes.
Well, I've learned something today.
So it's basically the burden that population growth imposes on the system as a whole. So obviously some immigration definitely benefits the economy. You know, it greases the wheels, so to speak. You know, limited numbers of legal migrants chosen for their skills and their high human capital. But there's the additional burden on, you know, housing, transport, schools, hospitals, public services and so on. And obviously the state finds it very difficult to catch up, if you like, in terms of building this.
Yeah, because if you're not really in control of it, it's tough to plan future infrastructure because you don't really know how many are going to come. And even now that we've got control, in theory, outside the European Union over migration into Britain, we haven't really, have we?
No, well...
Because if you pass certain criteria, you can come.
Yes.
We're not capping anything.
I mean, one of the promises of Brexit was to take back control. You know, national sovereignty, Parliament taking account for numbers and so on. But what we've seen is a points-based system that actually debases immigration standards in terms of qualifications, salaries.
Because we lowered, we all thought with an Australian-style point system, what it meant was the bar would be raised.
Yes.
But in fact, it's been lowered.
Absolutely, 100%. Obviously, the Conservative Party are committed to reducing illegal immigration. I don't think there's any deception there. They're genuinely committed to it. But on the issue of
not doing very well, are they? But anyway, go on.
No. But on the issue of legal migration, that's an intentional political decision. They have actually made choices in terms of policy that will keep the numbers high and actually increase them.
It's almost like their dirty secret, isn't it? They promise at election after election tens of thousands, tens of thousands, tens of thousands, and they've now given up completely. Tell you what, I also find amazing, Mike, you know, your organisation, as I say, you were set up in the early 2000s. There's no statistic or figure you've ever produced that has been said to be wrong. You know, even The Guardian don't criticise your analysis and your figures. They just don't. And yet, apart from Sir Edward Lee, the backbench Conservative member for up in Lincolnshire, I can't think of a single member of Parliament who's even raising this subject about the population explosion. I mean, you don't have much support in Parliament, do you?
Yeah, it's surprising. I mean, this is one really important aspect of migration policy. It's Janus-faced. So the government talk tough, but they deliver more liberal policies than what the public demand. And I think this is going to completely reshape British politics in the future. And certainly I think the Conservative Party are making a rod for their own back on this.
Mike Jones from Migration Watch, thank you for joining me. And when you think about it, folks, isn't it astonishing? You know, since Tony Blair came to power, our population has risen by more than 10 million. And 85% of that is directly down to new people coming into the country. And by the way, many of them are very, very good. Many of them are great people. Many of them are law-abiding and work hard and do well. Not all of them, but many of them. But the problem is that sheer population push has diminished our quality of life. Just try and drive around the country and get stuck in traffic jams. What hope have you got in many parts of Britain of getting a GP appointment? Oh, and if you want your kids and grandkids to have the things that you had, like houses, well, frankly, it's become almost impossible. In a moment, we crossed the pond to America, where a set of state elections last night delivered very good results for the Democrats, disappointing results for the Republicans. I wonder, is abortion now becoming a major problem for the Republican Party?
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Remember on Monday I told you there was some polling out in America over the weekend putting Donald Trump really quite well ahead of Joe Biden in the presidential race in 5 of the 6 key swing states, a reflection that Trump actually is doing quite well. The more they victimise him, the more popular he becomes. But it also shows that actually confidence in Biden is falling. But his party, the Democrats, last night exceeded all expectations. In Virginia, which has always been a bellwether of what's to come, despite having a Republican governor, quite a well-known one, in Glenn Youngkin, actually the Democrats now control both of the houses. And those results were repeated across many states in America. Well, joining me to discuss why this happened and what it means is Dave Rubin, American commentator and host of his own political talk show, The Rubin Report. And he joins me live from Miami. Dave, thank you and welcome to the show. Let's start with Virginia. You know, Glenn Youngkin won that gubernatorial race, quite a popular figure. He told Donald Trump, keep out of Virginia, we can handle this. What went wrong?
Nigel, Virginia is a really, really bizarre one. Youngkin is not only really popular, but, you know, if you look at his election, which was less than 2 years ago when he became governor of Virginia, 3 or 4 days before, he was getting crushed in the polls. It was only until he really leaned into the anti-woke stuff, in his case, specifically about gender pronouns and girls and boys bathrooms and the rest of it, that he got the parents behind him, and then he won pretty solidly. And by most estimations, people have been saying, oh, this is great from, let's say, a conservative perspective. You know, it looks like Virginia is going to start really leaning red, more in line with, say, Florida, where I am. So what happened yesterday is really, really bad. I mean, conventional wisdom on this thing is that the Republicans, as disgusted as many people are with the Democrats, when you see the real radicalism of the left and what I call the Hamas caucus, and the fact that Joe Biden clearly is not the functioning president of the United States, despite all of that stuff, somehow the Republicans have a really bad branding problem. And you mentioned before the break that abortion seems to be coming back as an issue, which is really unfortunate, because regardless of where you sit on abortion specifically, you know, if you think about what the government is supposed to do, say protect our borders, have some sort of economic policy, you know, the things that government's really there for, abortion, I know it's very close held to heart for all people, but it shouldn't really be that high up on your apex of important issues to deal with, because it's not something the government should have that much to do with. So it's a non-winner for the Republicans, unfortunately, and I think they're starting to pay the price for it.
Yeah, it's a big problem, isn't it? I mean, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. They put it back to the states, which you could argue actually was a very democratic decision to say to people in states,
absolutely,
you can decide.
100%.
However, it's being seen that this was a Republican move, that Republicans want to ban abortion completely. And I thought the other result, Dave, that was really interesting was the ballot measure, the referendum that took place in Ohio, where by quite a clear majority, you know, they voted to keep, as they put it on their side of the argument, reproductive rights in the state of Ohio. And the real problem here is, in some of the really strong Trump voting areas, there were big turnouts to vote that abortion should be allowed to continue. So the party's got itself in a real mess with this. And my worry, Dave, is you go into next year to the presidential election and there'll be ballot measures like this in 10 states, 20 states, 30 states that'll push the turnout up. They're in real trouble on this, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a great point, because the more they put these ballots and these initiatives and attach them to a presidential election, if you think that abortion is one of the important things which you vote on, which again, I unfortunately think that a lot of people do think that. It shouldn't be. There are way more important things the government should be dealing with. But if you put that up there as that apex issue to vote for, then people will vote on abortion more importantly than who they would vote for presidential politics. So you're also right, by the way, that, you know, when Roe v. Wade was reversed, it was the solid Democratic position, meaning you kick things to the states that are not designated in our founding documents to the federal government. So we've done that right, and every state, look, I'm here in Florida, we have a heartbeat bill at 6 weeks. Some states like California have quite literally 8-month abortions. You can decide for yourself what you think is more radical. But we do know, especially with urban and suburban women, middle-class women, abortion is just up there, and it will supersede what they feel about the economy, what they feel about the borders, and almost everything else.
Yeah, no, this is, I mean, Donald Trump himself recognizes this. You know, he is aware that, you know, whilst the pro-life position is an absolutely respectable, decent position held by many Americans, it is a minority position, even amongst conservative Republican voters. Moving on to Dave, I mean, you, in recent times, have lost confidence in Donald Trump being the candidate, and yet there isn't going to be anybody else, is there?
Well, I'm not so sure of that. I mean, well, first, I should say, as you know, Nigel, and we discussed it when I saw you in London last week, I voted for Trump. I like Trump. If he is the nominee, I'm going to support Trump. Yeah. I am here in Florida, a state that is by far the most functional state in the nation, where we believe in law and order, where we did right on COVID, where we've gotten ESG out of our system, where we fought woke and fought Disney and all of those things. I think Ron DeSantis at 45 years old is ready for a generational change, which I think desperately needs. I also think, as I'm sure you know, Kim Reynolds in Iowa, a super popular governor in Iowa, she just endorsed Ron DeSantis, which if I'm to believe that he's down by 50 points, that's quite an odd move by Kim Reynolds. I mean, why would she go all in on him? So look, I don't know what's going to happen. We don't vote for another 2 months, right? That primary is not for 2 months. I do think that the polls are a little, let's say, shady. But look, Nigel, you've been in politics for a long time. You know that nothing matters until people get into that ballot box. But either way, whether it's DeSantis or it's Trump, it will be better than Biden or whoever they decide to replace him with. And I'm still not convinced he's even going to be the nominee. So we just need someone that will push us a little bit back toward sanity, because the Democrats, much like your Labor Party, the left in America has gone completely bananas, and until we stop letting the inmates run the asylum, we will continue that slow descent to hell with them.
Dave Rubin, thanks for joining me. And I wonder, actually, I don't think Biden is going to be their candidate, but maybe after last night they'll think, oh, we're doing quite well under him. Dave, come and join us again very soon, please. Thank you.
Anytime.
OK, that was Dave Rubin, and yeah, really interesting how this issue of abortion is really beginning to cause the Republicans very, very serious problems. Now, a piece of very good news. There was a journalist called Carol Cadwallader, and she wrote for The Guardian, and she became convinced she'd uncovered the great conspiracy of the century. And it was that the Aaron Banks campaign, which supported me in the referendum, was funded by the Russians. And goodness gracious me, did they put Aaron Banks through absolute murder. People believed her. She won. She won the George Orwell Prize for journalism. People like Jon Snow of Channel 4 were saying what an amazing journalist she was. And there were front pages after front pages, huge reports on Channel 4 News, the BBC, Banks funded by the Russians, Farage funded by the Russians, funded by the Kremlin. And goodness gracious me, Russia was mentioned 144 times in my subject access requests from Coutts Bank. Now, it was all a complete lie. Believed by the establishment, spoken about in Parliament, abusing parliamentary privilege. They did it to me, they did it to Aaron Banks repeatedly. And Banks, as a businessman, faced ruin as a result of it. Because a parliamentary committee, having found no wrongdoing, then referred Banks to the National Crime Agency, nearly closing down a business that then had 600,000 customers insuring their cars with him. Well, Banks fought back, and it's taken him years through the courts, but now the legal case is over. He has won his defamation case against Carol Cadwalladr. It's cost him a huge amount of money to do. She has a lot of money to pay. Those who backed her in her online fundraising attempt, frankly, have all been conned. But the Russia hoax has now finally and completely been put to bed. Well done, Aaron, for doing what you've done. I would love to have sued her myself. I just couldn't take the financial risk because a case like this runs into over 7 figures. Going to law, even when you win, still proves to be quite an expensive business. Now, talking of Coutts Bank, I'm going to be joined in a moment by a man who was ahead of me, way ahead of me, in describing what the banks were doing to honest, decent people. He's the boss of TechRound. He'll be here in a minute, because apparently complaints about debanking are going through the roof, which I think is a good thing. Maybe the government and the FCA will really start to listen.
Coming up on GBN Tonight with me, Mark Dolan. Should this weekend's pro-Palestinian march on Armistice Day go ahead? Lee Anderson joins me live in the studio, and he reacts to Carol Vorderman's sensational axing by the BBC. Plus, I asked Tom Bower if Rishi Sunak has already conceded the next election, and would a Labour government mean 5 years of chaos? Join me for 2 hours of feisty debate, 9 to 11 on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK. Here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too. In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, the front of today's Daily Telegraph business page, big headlines telling us that complaints about being debanked are going up and up and up. And people aren't just taking it lying down anymore, they're complaining. They're complaining to the Ombudsman. They're writing subject access requests to their bank. They're making a bit of a noise about it. And a very, very good thing too, because I think what I've done is to help lift the lid on a very major national scandal. I say help to lift the lid because David Soffer, founder and editor of Tech Round, which is an online magazine designed to help businesses deal with these problems, you wrote a big piece in February this year before me about what was happening to businesses.
We did, and we were contacted by a few people who actually, they didn't specify even a particular bank. It was quite a widespread problem. I mean, our piece quite prominently features Tide, which is a challenger bank, but it wasn't limited to Tide. It was limited to national banks, challenger banks, and it's something that I think has been snowballing quite a lot and affecting more people than I think people thought it would affect, if that makes sense.
One of the cases that you had was a business doing regular business with Germany, but rather than having 1 month's invoice paid, there were 2 months' invoices paid, and they thought this must be money laundering. All is money frozen.
So people have that, and there's these broad brush terms like money laundering, and there's KYC, know your customer, and a lot of these things are thrown around, and I think people get scared by hearing it, like, oh my gosh, money laundering. But actually, it can be a small discrepancy in a system, but unfortunately the business suffers because of maybe a flaw in a system or something that maybe rings a bell within the bank, and I think that's part of the reason I think people are falling foul of this. And obviously there's other cases and other reasons.
Oh, yeah, I mean, cash, for example. Businesses that operate, fish stalls that take cash, because most people give a tenner, and they found that either the branches have closed, and even if they're not closed, they're reluctant to take much money from them. There are so many reasons. Political debanking, very clear in my case. What's interesting, David, is, you're writing about this, following this the whole time. We've had very positive words from the government.
We have, and words are always nice.
Yeah.
But really, I think having a bank account is almost, I wouldn't go so far as say a human right, but it's something that you need to function in society. Without a bank account, you can't, well, increasingly you can't do anything, because a lot of places won't even accept cash. So you can't have the cash under your mattress and use that because, a great proportion of places, they won't even accept it. So without a bank account, you almost become, you can't function within society.
No, I mean, should we be pushing a campaign for it to be a basic right that an individual or a legitimately founded business have the right to a bank account?
I would say yes. I would say absolutely, because, like I said, you can't function without one. But I think what's quite interesting, and I think what your case has, in a positive way, really blown the lid off, is now we've been approached by increasing numbers of people interested in subject access requests, people talking about the same kind of problem. And I think what that really talks to, which is actually, I suppose, a positive thing, a silver lining, if you like, is that people have more access to more information than ever before. So they say, hold on a second, this happened to this person or to this business, this now happened to me. I'm not an isolated case.
Yeah.
How do I find out more and empower myself to challenge this?
Are you finding, we have to be careful slightly what we say, but are you finding some banks are being more positive than others?
No.
No.
I don't think it's... This is the thing. I couldn't put my finger on... I wouldn't go and list the number of people from different banks who've contacted about different things, but I couldn't put my finger on it and say there's a particular bank or two particular banks it happens to. It's quite a widespread problem. And I say initially it was Tide Bank, but they're by no means the worst or the best or anything. I think it's happening through national banks, challenger banks.
And for a business to get closed down, limited company, you can be operating in quite legitimate way, the system flashes something up. How long does it take now for a business from scratch to open a bank account, typically?
Potentially months. I know that when I opened my first business bank account, it took probably about 2 months just to open the bank account. And even after you open it, they send you back more queries and they want more documents and more things. And you think now, if you go to a bank and you wanted to withdraw even cash, they make that slightly more difficult. They'll say, why do you need it? But in essence, it's your money. So if you wanted to do anything that's legal with your money, you should be allowed to do it.
The problem is we've got know your customer regulation, we've got money laundering rules. But as soon as you suggest deregulating, everyone throws their hands up in horror and says, it'll be a criminal's charter. It's very difficult to change this stuff, isn't it?
It's extremely difficult, but again, I think people are empowered now, and this is a good thing, more than ever.
Yeah.
If people think they've been wronged, they can research, they can find information out there. I mean, we have information, other places have a ton of information. And almost ironically, the same platforms, be they search engines even, that may deplatform people, the way their algorithms will often work is they want to provide people with information, they want to provide people with value, and they want to give people essentially the answer to their solutions, which means that if you Google search for something and you have a problem, debanking, subject access requests, you're likely to be able to build yourself quite a compelling case before you even need to seek legal advice.
David, you've been standing up fighting for these people. I've come along a little bit later, made a lot of noise, but I do want the government to act on this, and I think the campaign for the basic right... Funny enough, Labour should support this as well. The basic right for individuals and legitimate businesses to have a bank account. David, thanks for joining us on the programme. Now, a piece of very surprising news. GB News is going back into Europe. Yes, we are the Rejoiner channel, because have a look at this map. This is now where our satellite broadcasts to. We're broadcasting now across the whole of the European continent, and it's free to view. And it's interesting that we're doing this because the other broadcasters now don't broadcast across the continent. So we are, and this proves the point, you see, as ardent Brexiteers, we were always pro-Europe. It was just the European Union and the ghastly people running it that we didn't like very much. And I think this is a piece of good news, and the channel does, but we're growing. Online, our growth is phenomenal, and we're making real progress. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, you never thought you'd hear me as a rejoiner, did you?
Well, the only thing I'm slightly surprised is that the graphic isn't in pink, with expanding pink across the map, indicating the GB News empire is spreading.
Rees-Mogg can't help himself with this stuff. He really can't help himself at all. They were wearing a Canadian poppy today.
I am, yes. I was in Canada last week, the end of last week, so I wasn't here on Thursday. And a Canadian admired the British poppy, so I did a swap. And I've got a Canadian one. I think they're very smart. I think their poppies are better than ours.
So do I. Well, of course, it was a Canadian field doctor that wrote a poem just outside Ypres in Flanders Fields, where poppies grow, the crosses line up row on row, and there isn't time for the rest of it because I'm afraid we've got to
get to the weather. But I was just going to say I've got a most brilliant guest on this evening.
Go on.
Exciting. Everyone wants to hear him. He's known as Nigel Farage.
Right. Oh dear. It looks like I'm staying on a bit later tonight. First, let's get the weather.
Good evening, it's Alex Burkill here again with your latest GB News weather forecast. Whilst there will be some clear and sunny spells through the next day or so, there will also be plenty of heavy and possibly thundery showers because low pressure across northern parts of the UK is dominating the weather, leading to a breezy and showery theme for many of us. As we go through this evening and overnight, showers across western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland will become more widespread, filtering across many areas of England and Wales. Some of these could be heavy, possibly even thundery, but there will be some clear skies in between, especially across northeastern parts of Scotland. Here a touch of frost is quite likely, and even elsewhere a bit of a chilly start first thing on Thursday morning. Through the day itself, though, it is going to be a showery picture for many of us. The heaviest showers will be in places towards the west, exposed to the brisk winds. Also some hefty showers towards the far southeast as well. Likely to be driest across eastern areas and across central and northern Scotland, with some decent sunshine here, but temperatures a little on the low side. Highs around 8 or 9 Celsius, milder further south with highs around 11 or 12. Friday then gets off to a bit of a damp start across southern areas with some showery rain, but that clears away, and then we end up with a northerly wind. And in that northerly wind, we're going to see the most frequent showers across northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and perhaps fringing into western and eastern coasts. Elsewhere staying drier, and more dry weather to come as we go into the weekend before some wind and rain arrives later. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio.